The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in different parts of the world. I'll just show my face also briefly just to see that you have got, I need a haircut. So thank you all for joining from different parts of the world. And we have with us our outstanding speaker for today. And as you can see from the screen, it's Dr. Jacqueline El Said. She is the Chief Academic Officer from American Society for Engineering Education. And you can see her distinguished background and career. She's now, she has been the Chief Academic Officer and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Marygrove College. Before that, she was a faculty member and at Kettering University. And as you can see from the write-up, lots of experience in various aspects related to engineering education. So we're just so delighted to have you join us, Dr. Jacqueline. We will now give you the presentation screen, and you can go ahead and click on show my screen and take it away from here.
Great. So good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be invited to speak to you today about a topic that is really very important to me, and I've spent a lot of time as a faculty member and as administrator, and now at ASWE, really looking at experiential learning and specifically in the context of engineering education. So I'm going to now that I said hi to you, I'm going to turn off my video and go right to our slides. So today I'm going to talk to you about designing an online entrepreneurial experiential learning internship. I started my career in engineering actually as a co-op student at General Motors Truck and Bus Group in Detroit, Michigan. And that was because I was going to General Motors Institute, which is now Kettering University. And so as a faculty member, after having a career in industry and then joining Kettering University as a professor, because it had mandatory cooperative education, and that is my background, I really, as an educator, found it is a passion of mine to understand how can we do it better, and how can we really support the students, and how can we understand how learning happens. And so this is one component of this work that I would like to speak with you about today. So in my I'll move this over here. So one of the things, this is the overview what I'm going to talk to you about. The first part, I'm going to concentrate on learning theory. It isn't always that we think about learning theory when we think about experiential learning or internship, but it's very important as educators that we are intentional. The second part, I'm going to talk about design of the learning process and go in how, what are the best practices in designing our experiential learning. I'll then give you an overview of my recommendations on designing an online entrepreneurial experiential learning internship. And then I'll give you a case study of some of the work that came from my ACE fellowship in 2009 and led to where I was placed at Harvey Mudd College with President Maria Clave, and I visited over 25 different campuses. Then I did a benchmark study of experiential learning, mandatory experiential learning institutions, and came back and made changes to Kettering University's experiential learning. So I first wanted to discuss the differences between internships versus experiential learning, because some people might find this is almost redundant. And to me, experiential learning is a broader category. Internship is one type of experiential learning within the set of experiential learning internships are a subset. So let me just explain to you how I see things. And I have at the bottom of all of these, all my slides, and at the end, I do have the references so that you could look them up if you'd like to. So in general, internships are very context-based with specific industries. So we see the benefits or the values of internships is that students gain important industry knowledge. They get a foot in the door of any particular company or a specific industry. They develop professional skills. We know there's both knowledge and skills that we hope our students gain from their higher education experience. They have experience for their resume, and they grow their professional network. Now, experiential learning is broader, and this is an intentionally designed academic experience. Because of the way it works, it constructs knowledge as well as if it's well designed in a superior manner. It goes about with a theory of experiential learning, which I'll talk about next, but we'll see accelerated learning, self-efficacy, and improved attitudes. So at the end, you can see end of both these columns that the last three are basically the same. Both of these prepare students for real life, both provide career exploration, and both help students gain confidence and self-efficacy. However, experiential learning is broader, and internship is one type of experiential learning. We might also see cooperative education. Under experiential learning, we might see cooperative education, internships, service learning, etc. So experiential learning is a broader set, while internships are a subset. So the theory of experiential learning is plan, do, reflect, learn. So in order for students to really learn, it is said, there's a quote that said, students don't learn from experiential learning, they don't learn from experience, they learn from reflecting on experience. So it's a famous quote. So in order for students to be able to do that, they have to first make a plan, and the student needs to understand what it is they're attempting to do. So they have to understand what are they attempting to do and what is their plan for doing it. This is a very important component to have that pre-work done so that students understand what are the outcomes they think they're going to gain from those specific actions of their plan. Then they enact their plan, they execute their plan, and then after executing their plan, they must take time to observe what happened and then reflect on how the outcomes were the same or different than their planned outcomes. And then from this reflection, they learn. And so this can be both small or large levels, but this is the essential parts of experiential learning. And often when it comes to experiential learning, we forget about the theory of this. As you'll see, it isn't necessarily forgetting even, it sometimes is just that in the way institutions evolve, sometimes components of the theories are not highlighted as much as they should be. So this is very important. Plan, do, reflect, learn. Now, some of the best practices of experiential learning, I really gleaned from during my AC fellowship, we have a learning contract, and part of my learning outcomes that I was hoping for is to understand experiential learning and also understand how it's executed at different facets of engineering education and outside of the engineering discipline. So here are some of the best practices of experiential learning. That we have learning outcomes, and it's designed according to academic design. That there are developmental program templates and activities so that we scaffold the students in a ladder up into understanding the knowledge and the skills. that it's integrated with other programming, classroom programming, or other type of co-curricular programming, both in a horizontal and vertical manner, that the students need to have meaningful feedback during the experiential learning cycle. They must have reflective learning exercises. These are often must be geared to the learning outcomes that we design. It's a great practice to have online modules that will guide students learning during their experiential learning or their experience component. It's great to have scaffolding to be able to help students if they're having challenges in certain areas. It's also a best practice to have a culminating experience. And this can be, if you have several cooperative experiences or internships in a row, you could have one that overarches, or you could have some type of presentation or report. And then it's also great to use e-portfolios, because part of the things we just talked about with internships and experiential learning is that part of this is professional preparation that students can use, and they can showcase the projects and work that they have done on their resumes and in their when they go to interview. So that is the basics of learning theory. Now I want to transition into design of the learning process. So the design of the learning process is similar to what we would do for our classes or our courses. We first would select the learning outcomes, then we would design the integrated curricula. We would have, for experiential learning, some type of template that I like to share with students and the employers or the advisors so that everybody's on the same page of what are the activities. We design the activities often together, or in some cases, with some companies, they prefer the institution to give them a range of type of activities according to the template. And then it's really important to provide enriched environment and mentorship as the students go through. So someone who is a high-level mentor, as well as a faculty member, in order to help students, guide students, and have provide them with a manner with someone to bounce ideas off of and to help them understand what they're seeing, because they might be new to this and they don't see the big picture. So mentorship is critically important, especially for students in engineering from underrepresented groups. So the next section is about selecting the learning outcomes. And what I decided to do is give you some examples about how you can go about selecting your learning outcomes from 2 different sources that I'll share with you. So it's both the process and as well as the actual outcomes themselves. So when we go about selecting learning outcomes, part of what we want to do, remember this is for the internship. And so we're talking about experience, we're talking about entrepreneurship. And so one of the ways I like to look at what other people are doing, and I also like to get feedback from alumni or industrial advisory boards in order to inform what we as educators want to select as the learning outcomes. These also could go with your institutional learning outcomes. They should be aligned with the institutional learning outcomes as well as your accrediting bodies institutional outcomes. So the first one that I looked at that I want to share is this is a MOOC that is provided by Taylor University, which is in Malaysia, and it's entitled Entrepreneurship. So it has specific learning outcomes for this particular MOOC, and as you know, that MOOC is a massively online course. So often with a MOOC, the faculty member who is instructing the MOOC, it is not necessarily graded. It has peer grading or other types of alternative ways to get feedback for students. But this is one example I'd like to share. And so the learning outcomes that are listed for this MOOC is describe the key factors in organizing, explain the importance of meeting customer needs, explain the importance of effective resource management, exemplify the widening job description of professional engineer, explain the importance of human resource management, and appraise the prospects of e-commerce projects. So this is one example that is used by this particular MOOC that is by Taylor University in Malaysia. Let's go on to the next one. And remember that I have the sources for all of these at the bottom of the slide as well as at the end of the presentation. So this is one I'm very familiar with. Kettering was one of the founding members of the Keen network, and Keen developed what they call the entrepreneurial mindset. With the entrepreneurial mindset, this was particularly geared towards engineers. They actually were trying to develop at the time the entrepreneurial-minded engineers, because the engineers would come up with the innovations and then need to commercialize them. And so in their study, they found that engineers make great entrepreneurs, and that is why they formed the original Keen Foundation with largely smaller or mid-size engineering programs. So these are the entrepreneurial mindset outcomes. Apply creative thinking to ambiguous problems. Apply system thinking to complex problems. Evaluate technical feasibility and economic drivers. Examine the society individual needs. Form and work in teams. Understand the motivations and perspective of others. Convey engineering solutions in economic terms, substantiate claims with data as a fact, and identify personal passions and plans for professional development. Looks like there's also fulfill commitments in a timely manner, discern and pursue ethical practices, and contribute to society as an active citizen. So these are the entrepreneurial mindset outcomes developed by the Keen network, and it's actually on their website. Now, let's just take one of those. Can you imagine in an internship for entrepreneurship that you could have as an outcome that the student would be able to effectively work in teams, and then you could have some type of KPI that you might have under that you're going to actually measure? And so I think that it is easy to see how we could, this is not necessarily written in the way that we would write it for our internship or course outcomes, but still we can see how we would translate these type of outcomes, which are in the context of entrepreneurship, into outcomes for our internship. So once we decide on the learning outcomes, then we look at designing the integrated curriculum. So this is, I call this my fence post diagram, and I use it a lot as an academic administrator, as an associate provost and associate vice president of Kettering, or as the chief academic officer and vice president of academic affairs at Marygrove. I like to use graphs, and this is one way that I explain vertical versus horizontal programming. So this would be your vertical programming, where you have the majors, you have general ed, you have co-op and experiential learning, and this is entrepreneurship across the university, or some other such across the university. It could be writing across the university. It's a type of vertical programming that's like a ladder, and it builds up. So the students build their knowledge and skills as they go from their first year to their last year, whether it's in undergrad or in grad. Then we have the horizontal programming. So with the horizontal programming, if we're looking at undergrad, then you would see something like this, where we have the integration across the first year experience of these 4 vertical curricular threads. And if you are familiar with the first year experience, you can see how the students have perhaps a 1 credit class or 2 credit class, and they build across and they integrate and they develop skills. And the idea for this would be to take a successful high school student and make them and help them grow into a successful college student. And at the top here, we'd have the culminating undergraduate experience. And this is the same thing, that this would be something that integrates across. It could be the capstone of engineering. It could be in addition to the capstone, but it's a way to integrate across these 4 vertical threads. And the goal here would be taking a successful college student and putting them out as a successful alumna or alumnus. So the last one is, this is the scaffolding. So the scaffolding is like the academic success center, where there might be many different types of strategies where we help our students both in the classroom and in their internships, experiential learning, in order to be able to do the best that they can, have plan, have a roadmap, have different types of supplemental instruction or advising to help them really grow their learning skills and to be successful. So this is what I call my fence post diagram, and I, as an engineer, it's worked for me very well to have a visual when I'm talking about vertical and horizontal programming. So another very important part about experiential learning is that it's great to have some type of template. Now, you want to have a template if the students are doing more than one internship, or then you could have a template that's across all of their experiential learning experiences. You could also have a template that is within their individual or their very specific the very specific experience that they're going to have, in this case, an entrepreneurial internship. So have a template where it's designed for them to go through the activities. Now, if you're working with industry, then of course, then you might say, well, how would we get the industry to do this? Well, I'm telling you that one of my direct reports at Kettering as Associate Provost, Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs was the Cooperative and Experiential Learning Department. And so one of the things I found is that companies are more than happy for you to tell them the type of experience that they should be putting a freshman student in, or a sophomore or a senior. Students often need guidance as well. They might say, oh, I'd really like to sit behind a CAD tube and design things, when really, if we're looking at the knowledge and skills, we want them to start out doing something in the manufacturing plant or even in the mailroom, some type of thing where they learn the broad, expansive, have an understanding of the company, which is, and eventually they'll get to be able to do design work or analysis. But there's more to being a successful employee and professional than just the engineering work. As we know, it takes a lot to be successful, and our learning outcomes are beyond that. So when we talk about designing each learning activity, I found that it isn't always the case in experiential learning when that faculty or our educators actually have the authority or responsibility to be able to design the learning activities, and it sometimes can just be a black box. So when we try to integrate the experiential learning with the classroom learning or co-curricular learning, it's very difficult because we don't know what experience the student is getting when. And so how can we do that if it isn't designed with learning outcomes and it doesn't have specific activity design as well? And so with activity design, it's important that that the educators actually intentionally, you don't have to have a very specific activity, but it'd be a range or types of activities that you would like to see, because of course it's still exploratory, but there should be some type of idea of that we're at the 1,000 foot and not the 50,000 feet in reaching those learning outcomes. But I found that companies are more than willing and love to have the educators provide them with ideas on this. So when I'm looking at the context of entrepreneurial internships, we want to look at the activities. And so one of the these stages in the entrepreneurial process, I thought are great nuggets or seeds for understanding what are the type of internship activities that students should do in an entrepreneurial internship. And this comes from the MVJ College of Engineering in Bangalore, India. And so in Bangladesh and India. And so it's here are the areas that they list. And these are some of the areas that also would be covered in the Keen network as well. And the first is identification of an opportunity. Sometimes we call this need, right? And so the first thing is, what is there a need? Is there an opportunity? What is going on that needs to be fixed or needs to be improved? So first, identifying the opportunity itself. Once there is an opportunity, then there's brainstorming that happens to come up with a process or a product that would be useful to solve that opportunity, that challenge. Sometimes there's more than one way that it could go. And sometimes entrepreneurs have more than one opportunity that they're looking at the same time. And so the second phase is the evaluation of the opportunity and gearing how successful this could be. And this is a great time to have experienced entrepreneurs as mentors and people in industry or people that do commercialization or funding. It's a great type of or part of the entrepreneurial experience. The next is preparing a business plan. And the next is organizing resources, because it takes money to commercialize. And then once it's commercialized and launched, then and the startup phase is completed, then eventually there's a transition to the management of the enterprise and more into the steady state. And so these stages are I think great nuggets to think about when we are designing the internship activities. So as I mentioned, a very important part is providing support and mentoring. When we have, if we're going to have an online internship, we still need to have support and mentoring. Any type of experiential learning is important to have support and mentoring. The mentors really are very useful in high-level mentors, experienced mentors are very useful in providing the big picture. Peer mentors are very useful in providing students with in real time ideas or someone to share challenges with. And if you have upperclassmen dealing with junior students or lowerclassmen, then it can be helpful because they can give you the other student just the right idea of how they made the leap to overcome that particular challenge. So when we look at internal and external mentors, here are some ideas that you could use for you to find them. So for internal mentors, if we're in the engineering context, then we would reach out to our colleagues in business or management. The faculty there might be experienced in industry, or they've studied the parts of the field for a long time, so they'd be great to be an internal mentor. If you have an entrepreneurship across the curriculum advisor or a club of entrepreneurship, then those advisors would also serve as great internal advisors or mentors. Nowadays, we have so many incubators, and there might be an incubator director or staff that or the corporate relations staff member who could serve as a great mentor. And of course, as I mentioned, peer mentors. For external mentors, it's great to look at the alumni. Of course, most colleges and universities or institutions have some entrepreneurs that are within their alumni, and they would be really very willing to share their experience and serve as mentors. In addition, engineering in general, we usually have industrial advisory board members. And so among the industrial advisory board, that might be also a great source to be able to find external mentors for online entrepreneurship students. In addition, look at local commerce or Rotary clubs. So in the neighborhood, in the city that you're in the region that you're in addition to having incubators within institutions of higher education, there are also quite a lot of small business organizations and incubators within cities or with different regions. And so those would also be a great place to look. And also look at national or entrepreneurial organizations like Keen. There are several of them, and that will be also another source. And you don't have to have just one. You want to have at least one, but you could have a pool of mentors for students to utilize. Perhaps if you have several students doing the entrepreneurship internship at the same time, there could be a pool of mentors, but then they also have one specific mentor that would be working with them on their particular project. So I mentioned about the internship template. With the template, this is very important. We have a type of template when we have a course, but we don't always think of it in experiential learning or internships. Sometimes they just become black boxes that we say, oh yeah, the students learn something. If they go off and do something, they come back, of course they learn something. They do learn something, but are they learning what you want them to learn? And are they learning at a level that you want them to learn for those particular learning outcomes? So it's very important that we be intentional about what we want the students to learn. We be intentional about what is the threshold or the minimum that we want them to learn, and that we are clear that we are designing and supporting the students so that they can reach those outcomes. So with that said, here's my recommendation on how to set up an online entrepreneurial internship. Here are the components. In the time of COVID-19, we know that we're working remotely. And I know from being at ASEE as a chief academic officer, I know that there are 3 areas in engineering education that we're really struggling with in engineering education. One are online labs. One are the internships or cooperative educations. Often students have this as mandatory. And another component is are the capstone projects or team projects. So that's what really led me to develop this online entrepreneurship internship based upon my knowledge of experiential learning. So the first part is that the student should be advised as a faculty member remotely. There should be some kind of cadence to this. There should be a plan developed, a learning contract, if you will. And so a member of probably the departmental faculty of the student's department would be the faculty member of record. The student would be matched with an internal, external entrepreneurial mentor, which I mentioned, those are the sources, or you could have a pool of mentors for a pool of students. The activities would go along the lines of the entrepreneurial components that I mentioned: identification of the opportunity, evaluation of the opportunity, preparation of the business plan, determination and organization of resources, and the plan for management of the enterprise. So this would be the components that the activities that the students would work through based upon an idea that they have. And I know from my own experience that students are great at making companies. They're great at this. And so having a way to really hone their ideas and work through the different activities is something very exciting to many students. Now, when I look at the diversity, equity, inclusion, accommodation lens, these are the resources that will be required. Students would need to have a laptop. They would need to have internet, at least sometimes, and they probably would need a cell phone. So this would probably be the minimum. So if students don't have the wherewithal to be able to have a laptop, then perhaps the institution can loan them a laptop. There might be other ways through various ways that the students would need to be able to have a device. And I'm sure if you're already having your students worked remotely in the winter, then you've already thought through that. And those students that have challenges, economic challenges with having any of these things, then really important that to make sure they're able to get these resources. Now, for the accommodation, this can be either synchronous or asynchronous. So synchronous is much more challenging than asynchronous. Asynchronous modality means that the students can work when they have internet, if they're in a house with all their family members and they are one of the 6 children, that they could work at a time when it's quiet. And so asynchronous modality gives more flexibility for students who have DEI issues. Now, the next part is the students required to produce some type of tangible artifact with a reflective component. Remember, I explained to you the importance of reflection in experiential learning. So it's the same case with internship. Often, you would like this reflection to somehow address the activities and the learning outcomes that you've designed. But it's also great to have the students provide a presentation that helps them with their communication skills. They can provide a written report and using technical writing perhaps, and this helps them with their writing skills, but there should be some type of tangible artifact. And remember, we talked about the e-portfolio. So this could go into the student's e-portfolio to showcase the work when they are going to grad school or they are going to get a job, either way. And I suggest that the student do some type of virtual presentation or participate in an e-poster session. And this is when students from different internships or different types of experiential learning, they can actually present to each other. You can invite administrators and faculty to see the presentations or participate in the e-poster session. So this would be the overview of my recommendation of your entrepreneurial internship. So let me now go to the case study. So the case study is built on the GMI model, which is based as basically the West Point model, and it has mandatory co-op. It was owned by General Motors at the time, and the alumni mentioned the coordination reports. These are type of reflections that the student, as they go back and forth between their co-op and their classroom, that they would have to write these reports, and almost all alumni said these were perhaps the most important thing that they did during that time. And at this time, 1 in 6, during the GMI model, 1 in 6 became CEOs. So that's why it was called legendary when I did the benchmark study. Not by me, but by others. So this is an example of one of the benchmarks that I did, and this is looking at where among the mandatory cooperative education or experiential learning institutions, where was experiential learning in their infrastructure. So there were 6 different institutions that I studied. I actually visited them, and after my fellowship, I did 25 campuses, and then I selected 6 just for the cooperative education experiential learning benchmark study. And these were the 6 of the 25 plus that I visited during my ACE fellowship. And so this was just looking that with the infrastructure itself, and then I go back to my home institute, ACE fellows go back to their home institution. They have to sign something saying that they won't leave during their fellowship. So you go back to your home institution, and I looked at Kettering, which was my home institution, versus these, and I could see that for all of the other institutions, cooperative education was under the provost. But for Kettering at the time, it was under enrollment management. So it was under a different vice president than the faculty. And so made it a little bit more challenging for faculty to be able to design experiential learning. And so these are the recommendations of the report from the co-op benchmark analysis report. And the first was to move co-op under the provost, which happened in 2011. You can see the report was 2010, 2011, move it under the provost, appoint a high-level academic leader, which actually just became me. Actually, they appointed me, and that's when I became the associate vice president for academic affairs. Prior to that, during my fellowship, I was the director for the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and then I became the associate provost and associate vice president, and was tasked with designing this. So these are part of the components of program design. I actually changed the name from a cooperative education to cooperative and experiential education department. These are similar things that I already mentioned as best practices. And these are things that I wanted to put in place, working with my fellow colleagues and staff. One of the other things that I did is an alumni survey. And with the alumni survey, I collaborated with the alumni board of directors and was able to provide what are the strengths, the areas of improvements, and comments. And this is where I then worked with social scientists to do theme analysis to understand exactly what is important. And this is one of the things when I looked at the theory of experiential learning and what alumni were saying is that reflective learning was missing when we went from General Motors Institute to Kettering and expanding on our different types of degrees. I also worked with the students, and remember I talked about the templates. Well, I also, just like working with alumni, if you want to build something, it's great to involve others, right? People support what they help to build. So I worked with the president of the student body and the student senate and they actually recommended to me a template, what they thought an overarching template should be for experiential learning. Reflective learning was missing. It had, when I looked at the other mandatory co-op or experiential learning, they all had different types of reflective learning built into the program, and that had become missing at Kettering. And so it was one of the areas that I added, working with the faculty, whether the faculty, especially liberal arts faculty. And you can see this is our phased in plan of how we did that. We ended up putting in an extra 2-hour guided discussion reflection that when all students coming back from their mandatory experiential learning would go into this 2-hour discussion and walk through a guided discourse according to the learning outcomes. And it was wildly successful. The students really enjoyed it. I worked with faculty to develop online modules, and we piloted them. And this is a very important part that comes with entrepreneurship. At Kettering, there was the thesis, a mandatory thesis in addition, and still is, in addition to the capstone. And we broadened that. As we broadened from just cooperative education to internship, service learning, entrepreneurship, we also broadened the type of thesis. And so this was led by Dr. Matt Sanders, who worked for me, and his staff. And the thesis itself had to go through faculty senate, in order to be approved, as well as the learning outcomes for cooperative education, experiential learning. Everything had to go through the faculty senate to be approved because the faculty, of course, are the owners of the curriculum. So here is the parts of the thesis, which can be done remotely, which can be almost exactly, and you could call it an internship, but the faculty approved the learning outcomes for the program. The faculty was advised by our faculty member, at least one qualified committee member within the university. The student was matched with an external entrepreneurial mentor. The student was required to do some type of tangible artifact, including a comprehensive final written report. This one actually was a 2-term project, so it would be, in this case, it was a 2-term internship, so you can think about that as you design your own for your students. And then we encourage the students to all come back and participate in a poster session. So the conclusions are that, of course, internships provide really valuable industry knowledge and professional skills and networking, and experiential learning, as we can see, really helps to construct knowledge in a superior manner over classroom learning alone. I call it immersion learning a lot of times, and it really should be designed as an academic program to be most effective for all students. Entrepreneurship can be explored and startup piloted through intentional design of experiential learning internships, and integrating experiential learning with classroom learning, student scaffolding, resources, mentoring optimizes student success. And my recommendation for this particular internship can be executed in the current COVID emergency, both or either asynchronously or asynchronously, and it can be immediately executed. but to be really sustainable, it's my recommendation that you gain a lot of buy-in by having your long-term curriculum go through your shared governance processes. So in an emergency, of course, we know we can have experimental courses and we can change things for 1 or 2 semesters often, but to be sustainable, it's a good idea to have it long-term go through your curriculum processes. So that is my presentation, and I thank you, and now I'll entertain questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacqueline El Said. That was one of the clearest, well-presented presentation I've ever seen. Very clear and excellent. So time to reflect now a little bit, right?
Right.
I pulled out a few people into the panel and some active GEDC IFEES members. Perhaps they might want to share a few comments or questions. I'm going to start with Ala from Dubai. You want to jump in,
yes,
Ala? Any comments from you?
Yeah. Yes. I'm interested in knowing whether any universities are entirely basing their curriculum on experiential learning. I'm not aware of any, but is that something that's been considered at all that you know of?
So you mean without any classroom learning at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Or with classroom learning, but that is heavily based on experiential learning. So maybe lab-based and case-based.
I would say that of those in engineering education, you will find that the top ranked undergraduate engineering education degrees or programs are often heavily experiential learning. So if you see, remember I was at Harvey Mudd College for my ACE fellowship. They have something called the clinic model. This is completely integrated into the campus life, where all students do clinic, and the students that are not in clinic go to the weekly clinic presentations and updates. The president goes, the faculty go, they go to Galileo Hall, and this is part of what they do. They have rooms where they have projects, and so it's very much based in experiential learning. I saw a very similar thing at Rose-Hulman with their Rose Ventures. I know that Kettering also has the cooperative education is completely integrated. So if you look at, I think that the top rank under U.S. Undergraduate institutions in undergraduate, I think they are experiential learning is quite integrated. If we look then also at those institutions that I listed in the benchmark, those are institutions that have mandatory experiential learning. So Northeastern is a really very interesting pattern and model, and it's one of the institutions that I visited, and Waterloo in Canada. So there are. I haven't seen one that didn't have any classes, but I did see them. They are highly experiential.
Okay, let me
thank you, and again, thank you so much for an excellent presentation today.
Thank you, Ala. I'm going to go to Samuel Mukasa. Can you want to make any comments here? Are you there, Samuel?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. The only comment I might make is to ask Dr. El Sayed what she thinks might be the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning as we start thinking about experiential learning in the future.
Okay, well, I think that this is some of the things we're actually talking about with labs. And if we want to talk about experiential learning as projects or lab-based, or perhaps students working in industry, we know that through robotics and artificial intelligence, that look at medicine. So much is done. Both my sons are actually doctors, so the current state of medicine is that some surgeries are done by robots. Whenever you have a robot or some type of artificial intelligent device, you have a way for students to eventually be able to, through voyeurism, right, through the robot, to be able to see things that they might not normally be able to see, or see things across the world. They could actually interact using these type of devices in order to be able to participate in simulations or actual real life experiences. And so I think that it, just as the internet opened up a huge window for students to be able to see things at a younger and younger age, or see things globally and really decide that they're a member of a global community. I think the next level is when, instead of just looking at pictures or being able to speak, we'll actually be able to participate by some type of robotics or artificial device. And I think this will just take education to that next level.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Krishna, you unmuted me.
Go ahead. You have a question?
No, I did not request to speak, but I'm pleased to do so. I'm Xavier Fouget, speaking from France.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you, Jacqueline. It was very, I learned a lot in your presentation.
My pleasure.
One question I did not clarify so well is, when you talk about internships, is it about having the student physically present outside the university in a company or in another university, or is it something else? Because the current COVID situation has posed a big problem to those who have to be somewhere else than their institution, for instance, in a company. And if that's your case as well, I wonder if you have some lessons learned from being obliged to have your students being outside remotely.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my slide, and I was taking things that are normally done on an industry campus or in physical mode, and I was creating then this. I pulled up the slide again, the online entrepreneurial internship. So this particular one does not, the students can be working at home. They have a laptop, an internet, and a cell phone. This is the resources that would be required. It can be either synchronous or asynchronous. So when the faculty member would be advising the student, they would be doing so remotely. And when the student is matched and interact with the internal or external entrepreneurial mentors, they would also be doing this remotely. So this that I'm recommending here on this slide, this can be done completely online, because I know from the feedback at the American Society of Engineering Education, where I'm the chief academic officer, I know this is a critical need, that we have students that have mandatory internships to fulfill their degree requirements, and they're unable to do so. And so having something that is completely online, then this is something that has been designed as part of a portfolio from an institution that has mandatory experiential learning. But I took this and then I created this overview here that I'm sharing on my screen right now, and that would be completely online, because that is an obstacle we have now. This can be completely done. The student can do their research using the internet and their laptop, or they can interview people with their cell phone. And so they can do these activities here. They can work with their mentors, their faculty mentor, as well as their entrepreneurial mentors, in order to work through these steps or these activities. And then the end result is that they would need to have some type of tangible artifact. Well, look, for example, they should be talking about what is their invention, that they want to commercialize. They need to develop their business plan for that. They might be developing their elevator pitch that they might use to gain resources. So they need to write this up as they go. They should take notes as they go, and they should write up at some type of tangible artifact that they would provide the college or university with for this internship.
We need to move on. Thank you, Xavier. Kristen, any quick comment from you, and then we wrap up with Hans.
Thanks very much. Fantastic presentation. Thank you. I guess we imagine that students of today are very comfortable in an online environment, much more digital native than perhaps many of the people on the call, although I don't want to make too many assumptions. I wonder if any kind of training or support was needed actually for the people like the mentors or the internship manager, internship coordinator in the company, who maybe is a little bit less used, maybe very used to digital working of different kinds, but less used to managing, supervising or coaching an intern via this kind of online environment. Have you had to provide anything, or did everybody just kind of take it in their stride?
Well, I would say that in my experience, in my department of experiential learning that I ever saw, there was extensive training for the 600 companies, and there was usually, as they came on as a new company, then they would have training, and then as we rolled out a template, they would also have training. They were very happy to have that training, and there was usually, that's why there's two mentors as well. There's the faculty member as well as the industry, or in this case, the entrepreneurial mentor, so that the faculty member can also be able to provide that. I think that largely after the winter COVID emergency, faculty had to so rapidly, we saw this at ASW, they had to rapidly change to remote learning, that at this point, even if they weren't before, I think that they are more comfortable working through, like we are today, with GoToMeetings or Zoom or something like that to do their advising. So I think there is some, but also having the two mentors, having the advisor and the mentor together actually also helps, because the mentor, the faculty member, can also, of course, assist the mentor if they're having any issues with working in the digital environment.
Great. So Hans, you want to wrap up? We're out of time.
I do. Thank you very much, Dr. Jacqueline. A very thoughtful and a very relevant and a very strategic presentation. I really want to thank you on behalf of the leadership of IFEES and GDC, and we have several that are here. But I do want to just take a minute to share also with everyone, and the wonderful numbers we have here is that we, IFEES and GDC, have had a close partnership and friendship with ASCE, the American Society, for about 14 years. They were a catalytic in forming the two organizations of both IFEES and GDC. I just wanted all of you to know that, for some of you that may not be aware of that important partnership history of collaboration, and this contribution by Dr. Jacqueline today is a wonderful example. The other point I just wanted to mention, in the different world we live in, ASCE, I know its annual meeting in Canada will be done virtually in June. I'm very happy and I'm delighted that my good friend, colleague, Kirsten Williamson from Petrus, we're working together to bring deans and industry colleagues together in our GDC Industry Forum in September virtually. So not again face-to-face, but virtually in September. I just wanted to put this on your radar screens. Then I just want to let you also know, obviously we are not meeting face-to-face, the IFEES, GDC community and so forth in Cape Town this November. And we are now, and we have several leaders that are on this call here today, beginning the process to define what we hope will be an exciting, dynamic, out-of-the-box creative virtual conference in November, where certainly the corporate engagement is obviously of strategic importance to all of us. So I just wanted to share that with you. We are continuing very actively our webinars, working in close partnership with Krishna, of course, and also reaching out on a regular basis the Latin American community and Spanish community in our webinars in Spanish that are, again, bringing
many, many friends and colleagues in the different regions of the world. So many, many thanks. And again, Dr. Jacqueline, fantastic presentation. Thank you kindly.
Thank
pleasure.
you, Dr.
Thank you so
Jacqueline and
much.
Saeed. And
Thank you so
God-
much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.